and welcome to We Women Want, our weekly show where we discuss women's issues. We celebrate the winners, we empathize with the victims. In fact, this is fast becoming a support group where you can come, your destination to come and discuss with whatever issue that is irking you. We will come and try and find solutions for that. Today we are going to be discussing toxic relationships. Taking off from the Shraddha murder case, that wasn't just a case of murder, that was also a case of abuse. I mean, we heard the girl had bruises and marks, cigarette burns on her. She even went to the hospital, but no complaint was made. Some people say she was hesitant. We don't know what happened at the police stations in her case, but we do know that normally that is not the first recourse a woman would take. They would try and get over it, either because of society pressure or pressure from the parents, or also because of financial constraints. When abuse is something that happens not just in the slums, it happens in the finest of houses. It happens in homes when children are young. They see the parents talking to each other, the mothers being treated in a certain way, and somewhere it's ingrained in them. So today we're going to be discussing why are we as a society trying to normalize abuse and toxicity. Shouldn't we speak up? Shouldn't we be aware? I think the first point is really creating an awareness, which is why we are here today. Joining us on the show is Payal Chawla. She runs her own all-women law firm. She's also, as a young intern, was part of a group of students who prepared a clemency petition against 11 women who were accused of murdering their husbands. So Payal is a fierce advocate for women's rights. We have also Anshu Bahanda. She runs a podcast, a very well-known podcast called Wellness Curated, which you can hear on Spotify, Apple, and also on YouTube, where she discusses spiritual well-being, physical health, mental health, and of course, relationships. So I think she's going to be a very valuable person to have on the show today. And Devapriya Roy, she is a writer and author. Her books, she talks about relationships, and also a professor at the Ashoka University. Welcome all of you for this conversation. But Payal, you're the law person here. Why is our legal system, is it think strong enough to help, when women, half the time women don't come, it's because they are worried that, they won't get justice in the law. Even something like marital rape is still not a crime.
First, let me begin by thanking you for inviting me to the show. But as far as the legal system is concerned, I think we have perhaps the strongest laws on women's rights in India, and we have a very strong jurisprudence that is developed over the years. So it wouldn't be exactly correct to say that we don't have the laws to support or the judgments to support. I think the difficulties arising for a couple of reasons. One, society is not moving at the same pace as the laws have moved, so that's one issue. Second, there is an issue on recognizing abuse. Third, implementation is a problem. Fourth, there is a delay in the courts, we know that. So the gestation...
Recognizing abuse, that's the line I'm very interested in.
Yeah. Recognizing abuse, because I think most women that are in abusive situations have difficulty in the first instance to even recognize that what's happening to us, is that abuse, or is this just normal? Is this coming from a place where our husbands or partners actually love us and they're trying to, the abuse is happening from a place of love and care.
Being possessive.
Possessive. So that's a problem at the first instance. And there is an issue on education, because one of the things that I realize that if women come out of programs where you have learnt about abuse, you will recognize it immediately. And then the next steps of how does one get out of that abusive relationship, which is another conversation on its own,
So that's, I think, Anshu, I would like you to come in, is the recognizing abuse and how it is difficult to get out of abusive relationships, right?
So, in terms of abusive relationships, the issue is firstly, why do people stay in it? Yes. So, of course, there is the recognizing abuse. But, I mean, there's some commonly known facts. In a country like India, very often, you have no support. You go back to your family and they will say, this is fine. So what if
हमारे
He's
साथ भी
treating
हुआ
you
था,
like that.
हाँ, हाँ.
हमारे साथ भी होता कोई नहीं बेटा भूल जाओ, you know that kind of thing.
Adjust
कोई
कर
नहीं.
लो. Adjust कर लो is a very interesting
ठीक हो
word.
जाएगा, सब ठीक हो जाएगा, बच्चे कर लो, सब ठीक हो जाएगा. You know that kind of an attitude. So you don't have support outside. So how do you leave in a situation like that? The second thing is that the abusers convinced you that this is a form of love, exactly what you said, Payal. They say that, this is how people love. They explain to you that, to be screamed at or shouted at or emotionally abused or gaslighting, that's a form, you've been convinced, the victim has been convinced. But there are some other more unusual reasons why people stay in that relationships. There's an interesting concept called intermittent reward, which a lot of abusers do, which is the abuser will abuse the victim and abuse the victim and abuse the victim till the point that they're ready to break down and leave. And then they'll switch over and start being really sweet and say,
That's
oh, I love you,
interesting.
I can't live without you, I'm so grateful for you in my life.
I want to change.
I want to change. Yeah, I can't do anything without you. I will die if you leave me. And the abuser has been in so much pain. I mean, psychologists have studied this a lot, that this little bit of reward releases their pain and they feel, oh gosh, this is happening. And then when, that this person is changing and they relax and they kind of ease into the situation again, and then the abuse starts. And it's a cycle that just repeats and repeats and repeats. So that's one. The other slightly more unusual reason why people stay in abusive relationships is that in a lot of cultures, including ours, and a lot of cultures in the West as well, forgiveness is a big deal. You're taught that no matter what, you have to, as a human being, you have to forgive the other person. And that we don't realize, but there's such a huge cultural, what's the word for it? There's such a cultural...
It's confounding to the mind. That at what stage are you going to forgive, and what's the stage that you have to put an end to this abuse?
Exactly, exactly. And it's so deeply ingrained in us, forgiveness, that you keep forgiving the other person, you keep forgiving the other person, and it just becomes a pattern.
And because also we prefer status quo, it takes a lot to move and change. But I want to add, Anshu in her show, she talks a lot to therapists and counselors and comes up with a lot of advice. I'm going to come to you on the advice later. But Devpriya, I think the basic thing is, we take a lot of things for granted. Abuse, as we said, that emotional gaslighting, that's something I want you to explain to our viewers.
Right. And it's so strange that I see this even in my students who are 18, 19 years old, who are studying at a leading university, who on paper it would seem that economic freedom is one thing that they can take for certain, that this is what is going to set them free in a sense. And yet the emotional gaslighting is so real, right? I think, as Anshu was saying, is that, we ingrain these patterns for so many years and within the family setup that it becomes all right, even if you're not in a sort of a family setup which is not supporting you, even so you want to accept the status quo and think that things will change. So I think hope is what, keeps pushing us into that, and this belief that we can fix it, that somehow we can fix it. So this was, one of my 19-year-olds confided in me and told me this, and she recognizes this herself, that she's always attracted to bad boys, right? And she reads feminist theory, she's aware of feminist literature, so it's quite self-aware, and yet she finds herself falling into this again and again. And so we were having an informal chat, and I asked her that, why do you think this is? What is it that you're attracted to repeatedly? So she says, the uncertainty. The uncertainty that with this person, I don't know what sort of a mood he's going to be in on a day-to-day basis, is the very thing that attracts me. That is what is going to then implode and destroy, and then I'll have to take a step back or break up. But that is the thing. And I thought that, I appreciated her honesty in identifying this, though I didn't really have any advice as to how does one break out of a pattern like that, right? I would.
If I might add,
Please.
you know, so in abusive relationships, this is very well documented that most victims will go from one abusive relationship to the other. So it's a pattern that builds. This is all that you know. So if you've come out of families where you witness abuse, you will then keep falling into that same pattern unless there is and it could in many instances result in the end of abuse with one or the other actually ending up in death. That has happened in Shraddha's case, or then you get serious help. So those are the only ways in which this pattern of abuse will end.
Right.
You know, what you're saying about you get into a pattern of abuse. So someone had sent me a video. We did a podcast on boundaries, and one of the audience actually sent me this video, which was really interesting. It was about these two children, and the parents are sitting at dinner. It's two different families, and their kids have put up a little play for them. And in the play, these are tiny children. The boy, they come and they're like, oh, फिर मैं काम पर जाऊँगा. You know, the boy is saying to the girl, मैं घर आऊँगा, मैं अपना बैग रखूँगा, मैं खाना खाऊँगा, फिर मैं प्लेट फेंकूँगा. और उसके बाद मुझे खाना अच्छा नहीं लगेगा तो मैं तुमको मारूँगा. And the parents are like, what kind of behavior is this? Both sets of parents are just shocked that this. पर पापा भी तो यही करते हैं. So it's some of it is so deeply ingrained, they think it's okay. And then the girls just accept it again and again and again.
You know, the other thing with abuse is isolation. That in typical abusive relationships, the abuser will isolate the victim. And this isolation happens in a very strategic, thoughtful manner. So you will isolate from friends, family, and also from your own finances. So either you will make the victim give up their job, or then if the victim is earning, you will continue to keep isolating her from her own finances.
In fact, financial independence is a big thing, and that's why, you know, we see abuse more in the slums, the young the people who are not so well off. The parents also don't have an option to say anything, but this is happening even behind, you know, where parents can afford it. But there, I guess, societal pressure works a lot. Devya?
Societal pressure, or just sort of the pressure of being young people. There's a lot of, you know, uncertainty about the future. They have just been through a pandemic, so I think there's a little bit of that. I struggle to understand it, that, you know, but one of the things is that there's also hope, because I see a clear sort of recognition. So yesterday, before the panel, I thought I'll speak to some of them, and I asked them that, what would you consider as red flags in your relationships, right? So these are all 18, 19-year-olds. So one of them said that controlling behavior of any kind, that, you know, why are you hanging out with male friends? Or, you know, you said you're going to call me at that time, but you didn't, so what happened? Which is why a lot of them say that, you know, we don't want long-distance relationships, because it becomes even more difficult to sort of keep justifying or whatever. So this was one that emerged as a clear red flag, controlling behavior. The other was, you know, and this was a nuanced discussion, because we talked about political views, or what sort of views of the other person would you consider a red flag, right? And so I said that would you consider, if someone has very disparate political views to yourself, would you consider that as, so they said no, not political views, but for example, if the other person is homophobic or transphobic, we would recognize those as red flags, and we would realize that this might have other long-term consequences, and we would take a step back. So
it shows on the mindset.
Yes.
Devri, I want to ask you something here. Have you come across situations, because I come across it quite a lot, where the family is vegetarian. This girl's got married, the family is either vegetarian or they don't have alcohol. And then they make it such a big deal that this girl is going through abuse. So how do they cope with something like that?
Or not producing a male child. That's still, that's a big one.
Absolutely.
Yes, totally.
Absolutely. So this is something that I heard recently, and, you know, and this is where we've got such strong laws, right, about, for example, to stop female feticide, and yet we know that the legal system is constantly fighting whatever illegal. So this is just someone told me 2-3 days ago, and it disturbed me so deeply, that here's a woman, she's married into a conservative family, exactly of the vegetarian, no alcohol, very pious, has one daughter. When she got pregnant the second time, the in-laws were very clear that we do not want another daughter.
Oh my God.
So this girl, she went back to her family. They found some sort of shady arrangement. She had, right? But what happened after that is that she was so disturbed by this violence on her body, that she then went back to her in-laws and said, I am not going to have any other child. I am not going to go through, so you're not going to get a son either, because I'm not going to go through this again. And what else she did is that she's gone back to study, right? And so she said that for her, that was so she still stays in the in-laws' house because it's a complex economic situation. She cannot go back to her parents.
Yeah.
But, and her daughter is looked after by the in-laws and so on, but she has now completely freed herself within. I think that is the thing that is most difficult for all human beings to accomplish, right?
But Devpriya, hats off to her husband then, because I've seen situations where the guy would say, leave.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, that is true. I'm going to take a break and come back, and we spoke about boundaries. So how does one establish boundaries? What are the boundaries? What are we talking about? We're going to come and explain to you, but after a quick break.
$5 lakhs.
लोन चाहिए तो पैसाबाजार.com पर जाइए, लोन सही मिलेगा यहीं।
कौन कहता है रम्मी किसी स्पोर्ट से कम है? चैंपियंस तो यहाँ भी बनते हैं।
रमी कल्चर, चैंपियंस का कल्चर। इस गेम में वित्तीय जोखिम की संभावना शामिल है और इसकी आदत लग सकती है। कृपया जिम्मेदारी से और अपने जोखिम पर खेलें।
Hello and welcome back to We Women Want. This week we're taking a look at relationships, as to why as a society we normalize toxicity and abuse. And abuse doesn't just have to be physical, it can be emotional, it can be those what we call tanas, it can be control, it can be in all kinds of forms. And it does run both ways, but today of course since we're a women show, we're going to see the women point of view, because I do feel that the women are the ones who are more abused. Boundaries, Anshu, I think you're the one who brought that up. How does, what are boundaries? What do you mean by that?
So boundaries are, they can be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. It's the person that you are. And of course you have to adjust, but there are certain things, certain principles that you're not ready to change, that you're not ready to adjust with. And it's allowing yourself to put those around you. That's what boundaries are, basically.
Explain boundaries. I'm going to ask all of you what you understand by that.
I think I agree with Anshu,
yeah.
and that that it's hard to enforce when you're out of your comfort zone, right? That when you're still with yourself, when your boundaries are not meeting other opposition to it, that is when you can have a clear sense of it. And then when you go out into society, into a toxic workplace, for example, or a toxic relationship, and your boundaries are tested, I think that's when you really sort of learn to establish them, right?
Yeah. Toxic workplace also, Payal, there are, I don't know, but there are, instances where you really need to set boundaries, where a colleague, sometimes someone putting an arm on your shoulder is fine, sometimes it's not. So there's no set rule for that, but that's something that you pick up and you...
Power and control.
Power and, oh yes.
Home,
Well said.
office, it boils down to this. And then there is the touch and the touch, of course. So a person putting an arm around you could be just friendship as long as it's welcome. It could also be toxic at the same time. So and women broadly know what the difference between a touch and a touch, but workplace relationship, and I've often had even women confuse this to say, but at the workplace the relationship was consensual, so why is this a big deal? It is a big deal if there is a problem with the hierarchy.
Okay.
So the moment there is a consensual arrangement, within a hierarchical structure, that's problematic, and it has to be either reported where both parties come and say, look, this is consensual and I am not under any pressure. And in the absence of that, it could cross the line of sexual harassment. So we have to be very clear at the home and at the workplace is there power and control.
So
this
is
consent is very important, really.
Very important.
Yeah. Which is also in a marriage, I think, consent is again
very, very important. And I think that with the deepest of respect to the Honorable Judge at the Delhi High Court, who took a contrary view, but I think that marriage does not give any partner the right to say that, look, you've given away your consent for a lifetime. So there has to be consent, and I tell all young people that every time there is an act of sexuality, it must come with consent, and there's no harm in saying, would you like to? Even in a marriage or a long-term relationship.
Payal, there's a question I've wondered about, and I'm glad you're a lawyer, you can answer this. So in a marriage, what happens is, what if someone changes their mind? So it's a consensual relationship. How do you prove that in court?
Yes, so first let me address the change of, and I'm going to, can I be just absolutely stark and no pun intended here, but, at the nth moment, consent can be withdrawn. It can be withdrawn by the man, it can be withdrawn by the woman. And once there is a no, and there is a proceeding of that would amount to rape. So let's be very clear about that. As far as the evidence, this is I co-authored an article with Meenakshi Arora where we had dealt with this elephant in the room about evidence. Now, remember, for the rape standard, the word of the prosecutrix or the victim is enough as long as she's a stellar witness. Why should that change in a marriage situation? So, and nobody said, as long as once you're put under cross-examination and you're able to withstand it, you come out as a stellar witness, your word should be good. And there are other circumstantial evidences, remember.
Okay, Devpriya, I want to just bring you in this. We have discussed the mindsets of people, but now you're dealing with a lot of students who are woke and who are, is that the mindsets are changing? That's why more cases are coming to light. The young kids have...
Yeah, it's so, I think in India, the thing is that it's so complex because at all times we are dealing with women who are at different stages in their struggle, right? So for some, it is the struggle to just go to school. For others, it is, to choose who they want to be with. To others, it is to leave a person they have chosen to be with. So it's all happening simultaneously. So it's so difficult to say we make progress in one place, in another place there's 2 steps back. Really, I mean, I see myself as a student here trying to understand. I think what has changed and what we call the 4th and the 5th wave of feminism is that the smartphone has truly made a lot of things easy, and it has connected women in a sisterhood that is not as elitist as it used to be in the past, right? So I think that is one of the big differences that has happened. So even in small towns, even in villages, at least some of the awareness is reaching women as long as they have access to electricity, to actually a phone, to being able to charge the phone, to being able to recharge the phone, all those things.
So in other words, they want access to a support system. It doesn't have to be physical, it doesn't have to be your mother, but it has to be someone where you can reach out to, even if it doesn't physically come and help you, but just someone a shoulder you can try on. It can be via smartphone.
It can be a virtual shoulder, and also the information, I think.
Information.
Absolutely, the education, that's the key.
You can Google and in your mother tongue be able to at least find out what your rights are.
So a community.
A
community that will educate you and help you and support you.
And you have to catch everyone young.
That's the other thing, mindsets, what Anshu spoke about that video. The mindsets have to change from that age. It's very important.
Is that we have to also, in some way, also reach out to the young men, to the boys, because the increment, I think what you said, Payal, right in the beginning, that society is often much later to catch up with law, right? We can have ideal legal system, but we're still saying that law is a later recourse.
Yeah.
What we want is at least male friends, even in who are willing to stick their neck out.
That boys will be boys mindset.
That has to change
That has to
completely.
change.
And we have to stop using this language where you normalize boys will be boys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of our politicians have to stop using
Yeah.
that language also. Yeah.
Also, us at the, we have to, for those of us that have boys, have a greater responsibility with what we do with our boys.
Yeah.
And how we bring them up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
In fact, the Kerala in fact, there's a case going on where they've said that why are boys allowed to go out at night? The Kerala High Court is asking, and girls are not allowed
boys,
out
yes.
at night in the same way. So these are some of the instances that, as a society, as a legal system, as parents, one needs to bring in. Before I end, Anshu, you were telling me that we've been speaking to therapists, and some of them have also provided ways of coping. If you can just in a situation where you are facing abuse.
So, in a situation where you're facing abuse, very often, like Payal had said, you become dependent on the abuser because the abuser's made sure that you're helpless. And you've gone beyond the stage of anger to the stage of pain. So just to be able to break free from these dependencies, I mean, I have had a lot of different energy workers tell me how to work with this particular way where you have to cut your ties. And the first little step towards it is a few times a day, you sort of imagine these energetic cords between you and the other person and physically say cut, cut, cut 3 times. This is used by psychologists, this is used by doctors, even though it's energy work. But when you can emotionally and mentally cut those cords, then you can physically leave that house and go back and find your own life.
But it takes energy, strength, and also legal help and awareness to be able to walk out. That's something that, and we're not saying break a marriage, but yes, do not take abuse. That is really the answer. And there is a support group somewhere or the other. There are NGOs who actually, last week, in fact, we did a show with an NGO that offers you not just legal help, but also alternate vocation. They give you vocational training, so you can then be financially independent. So there are all kinds of answers that are there. People are there for help. So just come out, seek, ask, and I'm sure you'll find your answers and help. But that's it from this week. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming and sharing your views. And thank you for watching this show.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.